So here's the situation. We have our catapult. We're going to try to shoot with some unknown velocity. We do know the angle is 40 degrees. We're going to try to hit our target 100 meters away. We're going to assume that it's hitting at the same height. So let's go through our given values. Do we know the initial velocity? Do we know the final velocity? Do we know the displacement? Do we know the acceleration? Time? V initial y? V final? dy? ay? And t? Unknown. So we have a dilemma, right? What's our dilemma? Two known values, right? We want to get to the third value. And in fact, we really have kind of several unknowns. Well, here's kind of the big picture. What we're going to try to do when this happens, when we only have 2 and 2, is we're going to set up an equation in x, an equation in y. We're going to set up 2 unknowns in x, 2 unknowns in y. When we have 2 equations and 2 unknowns, what can we do? We can solve it, right? We can substitute and solve it. So that's kind of the bit. Whenever something like that happens, you don't have quite enough, try to get 2 equations, and then you have 2 equations, 2 unknowns, and you can go from there. So that's what we're going to do. Yeah?
Are we trying to find, like, the initial or
The initial.
And then, so, like, the hypotenuse of that triangle?
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. This is a hypotenuse of a triangle. So even though we don't know V initial, and even though we don't know V initial x and V initial y, we do know a little bit about them because the angle was provided. So for example, if I said this was 20 meters per second at 40 degrees, you would have no problem solving this, right? What would you say this was? 20 cosine 40. So we're going to do that, except it's not 20, so we'll simply call that VO cosine 40. And we'll call this VO, oops, out of space, huh? VO sine of 40. So even though we don't quite know all of it, we know a little bit. And so for my VOX, I'm going to call this VO cos 40. My VOY, VO sine 40. And so notice what we've done is we've taken 2 unknowns and made it 1 unknown. So we've kind of shrunk our unknowns a little bit. And actually we do know VFX now. What's VFX? Because of that 0 acceleration, it's the same. And we also know VFY. Negative VO sine. Good. So we know a little bit more. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to set up 2 equations and 2 unknowns. And the ultimate goal is to, once you do that, then you can go ahead and substitute and solve. So let's go ahead and do that for each of these. So let's go for the x direction first. Notice I really only have 2 unknowns now. It's VO and T. And on this side, VO and T. So we're going to set up our equations utilizing VO and T. So the first one we'll use is the one that we always use. And remember, we're going to be doing this on the x side, so only x variables. So this is going to be 100 equals VO cosine of 40 times time. So that's going to be my x equation. 2 unknowns though, VOT. We can't solve it, but we have 2 unknowns. We can now set up an equation in y. And at this point, you actually have a couple choices of equations to use. I'm going to use this one. I think it's a little bit easier than the other one. But you could use the same one that we used in x. So it's going to be negative VO sine 40 equals VO sine 40 plus negative 98 t. No, you just need an equation with VO and t. And this one has VO and t, and this one now has VO and t also.
So that was
VO. Well, it started with VF, but remember VF is equal to negative VO sine 40.
So it doesn't matter that the other one doesn't have the like.
Right, yeah. Because notice we turned both of our VFs into VOs, like something in terms of VOs. Okay, so we're now going to solve for t and substitute in. You have a choice. You can choose either one to substitute for t or solve for t. I'm going to choose the one on the right. So let's subtract this. So when we subtract VO sine 40, we get negative 2 VO sine 40 equals 9.8 times t. Negative 2 VO sine 40 over negative 9.8. Okay, we're now going to go ahead and throw t into here. If you want, you could kind of do the math on this. Some people don't like all these numbers. I'll definitely cancel out the positives. I'm just going to leave it as is. So 100 equals VO cos 40 2 VO sine 40 over 9.8. Now it's just going to be some algebra, right? Multiply both sides by 9.8. Divide both sides by cosine 40. Divide both sides by 2. Divide both sides by sine 40. What's VO times VO? So at this point, you definitely want to go ahead and do the math here and solve for it. We're almost done. Be careful. Please try to plug this in. A lot of people make simple mistakes when they do this. This is like 900 or something like that. 9 what?
996.
That's good. And then square root it. What's our final answer? 5? Okay, so that would be the velocity that we would need to shoot it at, 31.5.